can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sand. And right now, I feel like 100 grand.
You are listening to Inspired Insider with your host, Dr. Jeremy Wise.
Dr. Jeremy Weiss here, founder of InspiredInsider.com, where I talk with inspirational entrepreneurs like the founders of P90X, Atari, many more, how they overcome big challenges in life and business. This is part of the Prosper Show e-commerce mastery series, where top sellers and experts teach you what really works to boost your e-commerce business. They have an amazing conference with some of the top Amazon sellers and industry leaders, like we have Scott today. Our sponsor today is Rise25.com, where entrepreneurs of 6, 7, 8-figure businesses come together live and in person every few months to solve their biggest business challenges and leave with lifelong friendships. Check out Rise25.com. It's run by myself and co-founder John Corcoran. It's application only. Today, I'm very excited. We have Scott Galvao. He's co-founder of InterCultural Elements, also known as ICE, a German-based company with over 50 employees, which helps retailers expand e-commerce sales internationally, which we'll talk about. Before InterCultural Elements, he cut his teeth working on a wide range of international e-commerce for more than 6 years at AuktionMaster and ChannelAdvisor UK as an implementation manager. And from my research, Scott, ICE is often incorrectly pigeonholed as a translation company, but it's more accurately described as an A to Z service provider. So I'm going to have you talk about some of the things that you provide, which maybe people who know you don't even know about. A random fact about Scott is he holds a degree in both intercultural communication and geography from University of New Mexico, and he's lived in Germany from 2000. Scott, thanks for joining me.
Hey, Jeremy, thanks so much for having me.
You know, we talked before, and the intercultural, I just picture you popping out of the womb and having like a onesie with intercultural communication on it or something. Like, it seems so random. Why did you major in intercultural communication?
Well, I think popping out of the womb with that, I mean, yeah, that fits a little bit. So my dad is Portuguese. My mom is American. So yeah, from the get-go, I couldn't really get around it, right? It's sort of funny story, actually. My mom and my dad, when they first met, they spoke this really weird mix of Portuguese and Spanish, because my dad, again, being Portuguese, my mom had studied in Puerto Rico, so she could speak fluent Spanish. He could too. But yeah, this weird language mix started popping up in our home. So they always spoke this weird mix together. They spoke English with us. So yeah, I couldn't get away from it after that, right?
So was it something did you feel different growing up from the other kids around you because of the intercultural?
Right. So I grew up in southeastern Massachusetts, and there's a lot of Portuguese influence there. But so I think, by and large, I felt like I sort of belonged to that. But yeah, you're right. It's that there was a little bit more of a draw, I think. My dad's business, as I was growing up, also had to do with sort of Portuguese music and very intercultural. He traveled quite a bit. So yeah, I think I caught the bug from him as well.
So when you were younger, Scott, like high school-wise, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Good question. I think I really wanted to follow my heart. More than a job, I knew that I wanted to live in some foreign country.
You did? So at
yeah,
that point, you knew you'd kind of venture out.
I knew that I would venture out. I had no idea where or for how long. But I've always loved the States, but I always knew that I had this calling to see life outside the States. And yeah, I thought that would probably bring me to sort of Portugal, France, maybe, where I also have some family, but ended up being Germany.
So AuktionMaster, is that what brought you to Germany?
My wife actually brought me to Germany.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So yeah. So we met in this traveling sort of group called Up With People way back, gosh, now like 1999, 2000. And funny enough, that's also where we met our other business partner, because my two business partners are actually my wife, who's German, and another business partner named Edward, who's Dutch. And the three of us founded the company back in 2007.
So Anna, how do you pronounce it?
Anya.
Anya. So Anya is your wife and the co-founder, one of the co-founders.
Correct.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So what would you guys, when you moved to Germany, you were working at AuktionMaster. What was she doing at the time?
Right. Well, in the very beginning, I was working as an English teacher for professionals, but then very quickly, one of my clients in that project was actually AuktionMaster.
Mm,
So AuktionMaster, it's a relatively small company now, but it was bought by ChannelAdvisor.
right.
But it was basically one of the dominant listing tools back in the sort of the early days of e-commerce,
Mm,
right? Like early 2000s.
yeah.
And yeah, so I was brought on as sort of the head of the English language department, so to say. So I would
So you're
help all
fluent
the.
in Spanish, fluent in English, obviously, and fluent in German?
So yes, yeah. Spanish is I wouldn't say that. It's okayish. Portuguese is okayish. But yeah, German. I've been here for 17 years, so I would hope that I would. So. If not, I'm doing something wrong.
So for you, and I want to get into kind of the big mistakes people make when expanding abroad, but what did you learn from AuktionMaster and ChannelAdvisor? Because obviously you were there for 6 years. You probably got a lot of great experience.
Absolutely. And I think that was one of the first formative experiences for me to know how important this intercultural communication is in a real world aspect, right? Because back then I had studied it, I'd seen quite a bit in Up With People, but that was the first time that I saw what ended up being this potential merger between these two companies, which actually were sort of made for each other. It was a really good match, but it got onto some really rocky ground
Why?
during the negotiation phase. Basically, I think there were just some basic intercultural misunderstandings that were happening, because I think the American team that I was working with had some fundamental, I think, misgivings or misunderstandings about AuktionMaster and same vice versa. So that was one experience where I sort of came out of my normal role there and jumped in as an intercultural coach, and hopefully that helped a little bit, of that communication. But
What
ended
was
up
some of the
going
faux
through.
pas of that? Like, what were the, like, ChannelAdvisor thought they were communicating a certain way, but it was completely offending the AuktionMaster people?
Right. The experience that I'm thinking of was actually sort of the other way around.
Oh, really?
And
Okay.
I'm probably seeing this more from an American perspective,
Okay.
right? So my
I always
wife and
picture
I,
the American people offending other people. So me, yeah.
it's I think it could be an even mix,
Okay.
right? So, but in any case, a lot of it has to do with subtle things, right? Things that people don't necessarily even pick up on. Nonverbals, for example. One interesting fact is, if you're an American going to Germany, then what we like to do as Americans is we'll nod, right? You
Yeah.
tell me something and I nod just as an acknowledgement that I've heard what you said, right? Well, in Germany, by and large, that means that I've acknowledged you. Not only have I acknowledged you, but I agree with what you're saying. So it just so happened that during a lunch break, there was a conversation going on back then about basically the invasion of Iraq. And a German person brought this up, which, number one, is not necessarily something you do with an American, but politics it's not such a faux pas thing to talk about. So they
Right.
brought it up on a lunch break.
Yeah.
And as this conversation was going on, the American wanted nothing to do with this conversation whatsoever. So they were just nodding, looking down at their computer. And the German took this the entire time to mean, well, of course you agree with me. So he just kept on getting deeper and deeper and deeper until the American almost blew up and just said, do not talk about this. So yeah, and little things like that, it can affect a whole process, a whole merger.
What about from the ChannelAdvisor side when AuktionMaster was taken over by ChannelAdvisor? What were some of the things you learned that you then took with you when you started InterCultural Elements?
Right. I think the importance of effective communication. That's, as you said, very often, we have this idea that, Americans don't necessarily, cater to other cultures. From what I find, it has a lot less to do with sort of a nationality in general. It has a lot to do with your just intercultural understanding. And there's great examples from all countries, right? But I saw some really good examples from ChannelAdvisor, also some ones that could be improved on. But yeah, that importance of intercultural communication, that's what I really took over. And that's one of the founding elements of InterCultural Elements.
So how did you decide to then start InterCultural Elements?
Good question. So right back when I was working for ChannelAdvisor, we had the typical problem that we had. My job was to teach British new British sellers how to use the ChannelAdvisor software. So I would be teaching them for usually a period of a week or two. And at the end of that process, they would say, wow, this is great. Listing tools, perfect. You can sell all over the world, all these different marketplaces. But now we need somebody to translate it, to localize it, and then we need customer service at the end of that. And at that point, I said, I sort of flagged that with ChannelAdvisor and said, this is a great opportunity for us.
No one was doing it at the time.
Nobody was doing it at the time. Exactly. I mean, cross-border trade back then, there was no term for it. It was just, the random sale across borders, right? So in any case, back then, I flagged that with ChannelAdvisor, and I think back then, I don't think it was so much of a core competence that they wanted to pursue at the time.
Right.
I think everybody sort of jumped on that bandwagon since, but back then it wasn't necessarily a priority. But a couple of really great colleagues that I had back then, they said, if you guys want to found a company on this, you sort of have expertise in that, then we definitely help support that. And actually from the first year back in 2007. We've been partners with ChannelAdvisor, and ever since have really expanded out. I have a whole bunch of partners since then, but yeah, that was the first partnership.
So Scott, did they say, were you starting this on the side, or did you you have to quit and then just go cold turkey and start this?
Right. So one thing that myself and Anya and Edward have always said is that all relationships, all partnerships have to be completely transparent, and they have to be mutually beneficial.
Yeah.
And I think that was the best example. So a lot of people said, my gosh, what is this deal, right? It's like you're working for two companies, right? But it wasn't that at all. So you're right. Anya and Edward started the company back in 2007 full-time. And I stayed on as a ChannelAdvisor employee for a number of years, but it was perfect. It was a symbiotic relationship, because as soon as a seller would get done learning ChannelAdvisor, they would almost naturally ask that question, okay, if I want to sell to France, Germany, etc., how do I do that? And then I could say, okay, well, we do have a partner who might be able to help you with this.
So it helps with retention, essentially, for people to stay on ChannelAdvisor, because you're able to take them the next mile type of thing?
That's exactly it.
So that at what point do you decide, okay, this is getting too successful, it's too busy, I need to kind of cross over and do InterCultural Elements full time?
Right. So that was, at least from my switch over, that was 2011. And by that time,
tough for you or no?
Well, by that time we had 6 or 7 employees, and it was getting to the point in time where we thought, this could really run on its own.
Yeah.
We also thought that it was really time to have, a full-time sort of sales and marketing person, and me as a native speaker, I just sort of jumped into that position. So it was tough leaving a great family, because I know there's a lot of sort of pros and cons against listing tools and ChannelAdvisor itself, but I always found it to be just a great company to work for, and really enjoyed my colleagues there. So to that extent, it was tough to leave that, but really exciting to jump into my own thing as well.
So Scott, what were the original services you provided? Because I'm sure when you first started, it was different from it is now. So can you compare, what were the services then and what are they now?
Right. And, this alludes back to what you mentioned right at the beginning, of this recording too, where we're very often pigeonholed into translation, because we started off really primarily with translation, with this second bit of getting that translation then uploaded via a listing tool into Amazon and eBay and online marketplaces. But yeah, those two components were really it at the beginning. Yeah.
So the translation, which markets were you translating to?
Primarily Germany, France. We picked up pretty soon afterwards, and then every so often we had German clients who wanted to go to the UK. So really, those main markets.
And so that was for eBay and Amazon?
Correct.
Yeah. So that was when you started. Now compared to now, what type of services do you have now? Obviously, you still have the translation. Right. But,
as you also correctly said, we're really this A to Z service. So our goal is to make it so that if you are a seller selling online, most likely you're doing really well domestically, but you don't necessarily have the in-house resource to be able to expand abroad. Of course, you want to run the international expansion as well as you run your business domestically. But to do that, you need the expertise, and that's where you can outsource to us. So we handle everything from, number one, building a strategy for you, take a look at your products, figure out where your items might be able to sell well, which countries and which marketplaces, because there's a lot of possibilities out there.
Yeah.
After we build that strategy, then we implement it by doing things like translation. So we have professional translators here in-house to be able to do all of that for you. It's also really important that you have e-commerce specialized translators, because those are the people that they know where to put the search terms, how long the title should be,
Right.
where you put bullet points, etc. So translation, we localize it to make sure that there are differences between pants, trousers, different sizing, currencies. All that is really important. But then all the way through, I think one of the most exciting things that we've added really in the last couple of years is managed care.
What's
And
that?
right, so that really makes a difference. What we used to do is, we used to translate it and then put it into, let's say, Amazon Japan. But just because this seller is now selling on Amazon Japan doesn't mean that they know Japanese overnight. So to that extent, they really need somebody to be, caretaking, right, maintaining that listing. And tweaking it over time, just like they were doing their domestic listings. So we can do that for them as well. So we have account managers here from 16 countries. And so you always have a native speaker to watch your account, to maintain it, and then to proactively expand you onto more countries as well.
So if someone comes in, let's say for translation, and then they realize you have other services, what's the most popular service outside of the translation that people use you for?
Right. So, more and more it is this managed care. It really sort of checks a box that a lot of people have been missing, I think, in the last years. And it really, even for us, it took a while for us to be able to build up to that, to offer that as completely as we do. And then I think after that, post-sale, people really need customer service in those native languages to be able to make sure that they, keep all that positive feedback coming in. So that's something that we do as well. And then last but not least, we also have return service. So, of course, Amazon demands that you have this local return warehouse in every country that you sell to. So we also have partnered with a company to be able to cater to that. So as you can see, it's really this A to Z solution all the way through.
So Scott, for common customers, what would you say the most common? Is it like German to UK, UK to German? Do you serve people in the US? What are some common, avenues that people use you for?
Right. Yeah. So very much depends on where the seller is based. So we have customers, as you mentioned, sort of US based, lots in the UK, Germany, and then sprinkling throughout France, Italy, you name it. But right, so a lot of American sellers really like to expand into Amazon Europe, and it was funny. Just a week and a half ago, I was giving a speech on this, and some of the key countries that we focused on was the UK. That tends to be a really great place, especially if you like and feel comfortable with Amazon. The UK can be a great place to go into because the flat files are quite similar, all that. Having said that, I would give the warning to anybody listening that there are enough subtle things which do differ that you have to watch out for, right? Everything from sort of the obvious ones like currency, but sizing can be quite different. Then all the localization is really necessary with terminology, right? And those subtle search terms like sneaker, trainer are very often the exact words that those buyers are actually typing in to search for. So if you don't get those right, you're going to be dead in the water.
Right. So where else do you recommend, if someone's going US and expanding, is there a certain pattern you recommend? First you go UK, then you expand this way?
Yeah, good question. It's really hard to give a cookie cutter concept because everybody's different, right? And here's where I go back to this. The first part of what we do for people is create a strategy for them, because you have to take a look at the products, figure out number one, where, based on our experience, where we feel like they would have a real go. Number one, the country, and then secondly, which marketplaces within that country. I think if I were to try to give more of a sort of a cookie cutter concept, right? I think UK, Germany, France tend to be really good European markets to go into. But let's say if a lot of your listeners are located in the US, then we've seen a lot of success on markets like Amazon Mexico. Very often you have niches there that people have not bothered going into. Amazon Japan, we've seen tremendous success for a lot of our sellers there as well. Yeah, absolutely. But of course, there's little things in each of those marketplaces that you have to pay attention to when you go there.
So what are some of the, in the very beginning we talk about, expanding abroad and the big mistakes people make? I'm sure they make a lot of them. What are some of the like common ones that you see? Because I'm sure, my guess is, maybe I'm wrong, they try and do it themselves and then they realize they can't, and then they come to you.
Right, exactly. And we have like an hour to talk about this. Could we go for 4 hours? So, right, no, you're absolutely right. And there's a whole bunch here. Trying to do it yourself. It's a logical thing for most sellers to do because, let's face it, right? We're all entrepreneurs, right? This is how we founded our businesses. We like to get our hands dirty. But I think the smart ones of us also know when it's time to outsource.
Right.
So translation, right? The most obvious one. A lot of people say, well, Google Translate's out there. And granted, it is pretty impressive. And, for certain things, Google Translate, it does all right. But the way that I like to say it is that, if you think of all the blood, sweat, and tears that you've poured into that perfect title, that great description, the bullet points exactly as you want them. Now, would you ever think about having a machine create that for you? Of course you wouldn't, right? So why would you ever do that when you're trying to list abroad and you can't even check the quality?
So people just throw it into Google Translate and then just slap it up there type of thing.
And hope for the best. And, we talked to, it was funny, I was speaking to a seller out of Indiana this morning, and this gentleman was saying how he did exactly that, expanded into 4 different countries. The problem was that months later, he cannot figure out why he's not selling anything. We looked at the ad and we're just like, my goodness, this was Google Translated, wasn't it? And, yeah.
It's like a first grader translator or something. Yeah.
Exactly. And one thing that I would say really does differ is that in countries like the US and the UK, I think people are a little bit more forgiving with badly translated or sort of lacking language skills in some of the listings. But in countries like France and Germany and Japan, definitely, you have to be spot on, because if you're not, people are going to disregard it. They're not going to look at it.
So big mistakes in translation. What other big mistakes do you see?
Right. Translation tools. So we talked about that. There are hidden dangers in translation tools. Great example that I like to give is there's a UK-based seller who we have, and he sells all types of sort of heavy leather clothing, right? Biker clothing. And does great in the UK. When he wanted to expand to Germany, before he came to InterCultural Elements, he utilized a rather inexpensive company that used machine translations. Now, to be fair, the translations of the words were actually okay-ish. The real problem came when his sizes were not converted. So every time you saw UK 34, it translated it, right, to DE 34. The problem is the sizing is completely different from one to another. So that means every single...
They were getting a lot of returns.
Yeah, and that's the whole thing. He ended up hiring somebody just to handle the returns. That's one of the reasons why we say cheap translations can very often cause very expensive mistakes.
Mm-hmm. So what's another horror story you've seen?
Horror story. Right. Gosh, there's a lot of them. I think that's one of them. Similar thing, just maybe ratcheted up a little bit. There was a German seller who used a very similar, let's say, product service that utilizes machine translations to sell to the States. Now, they thought that they had everything sort of taken care of when they did check on things like sizes and stuff like that. But what they found was there was size differentiations even between different brands. So that's one of the things that, for example, with our local or with our in-house translators and localizers, this is something, they'll check brand to brand because they know this. But the machine didn't. And similar situation, except quite a bit more costly. Every pair of shoes that went across the pond had to come back, and of course on his dime.
Wow.
So yeah, so really tough. I think I won't even go into the numbers there, but the seller was
They lost a lot of money.
Yeah.
I was watching one talk that you did, and you talked about you've had to change people's, I don't know if it was companies' names because it was maybe offensive or something, it didn't sit right in that particular culture. Is there some examples you can give of before and afters? Right.
I'll give a similar one.
Okay.
Right. So we've basically had one rather recently, something as unassuming as the word flip-flop, right? Flip-flop. We use it all the time. So did you know that when one of our sellers actually wanted to sell flip-flops in Germany, we knew enough just historically that flip-flop is actually a copyrighted term in Germany.
Really?
So even by listing flip-flops in Germany, they could theoretically be sued. So that was one thing that you have to change the name of. But yeah, I mean company names as well. It can really be worth actually just changing them, just depending on maybe
because they're offensive. Like, is it because it just means something in that particular culture that would be offensive?
It could, yeah, it could be, exactly. And yeah, and in cases like that, you just sort of have to change it. Very often too, there's just different terminologies, right? Things are used for different in different ways. An example was a seller that I met rather recently. He sells all types of products, kitchenwares and things like that. But instead of doing sort of a one-to-one translation, we'll take a colander or something like that, and when we're describing that colander, we're going to give different foods that Italians would use versus French.
Right.
And that type of thing is going to get you more hits and more sales.
Interesting. Yeah. And so I want to talk about a few case studies, right? So you have a few. I think you mentioned the biker's gear one. There's Thorogood Sports. Can you talk about Thorogood Sports a little bit? What they came to you for, and then what happened after?
Right, exactly. Yeah. So Thorogood Sports, I think that was a little bit more of our sort of standard service, right? I think at the very beginning, they wanted to expand, but they didn't necessarily know exactly which marketplaces to go onto, and through that,
where were they based out of?
So they're based out of the UK, out of London.
Okay.
Yeah, great guys over there, and very, very entrepreneurial minded. Very much wanted to expand into a lot of foreign countries, but didn't necessarily know exactly where to go to. And that was where we came in, did a bit of a strategy, like looked at all of their sportswear products, and we found that there would be certain countries that they would do specifically well in, right? So Germany, France specifically, and then we found that there were certain marketplaces in there. So Amazon, always a pretty good bet, right? But some of their products actually would run really well on eBay, others on Cdiscount in France.
So you look at all the marketplaces, not just Amazon.
You really have to, because France is a great example where it's such a federated landscape. If you imagine sort of the French e-commerce as sort of a pie, right? Then you have a lot more divisions of that pie. So the pieces of the pie are they're a lot more, and they're a lot more evenly distributed.
Yeah.
So it makes sense if you're going to go through the expense of getting it properly translated and localized. You might as well sell that on La Redoute, for example, if you can get on there, as well as Amazon, because you're going to hit different clienteles.
Scott, so there are cases where you recommend someone not to go international, like a certain product or something like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say more specifically, sometimes it's not very easy to go into certain countries. Staying on the example of France, can be really, really difficult to get any sort of medicinal products on there. So any of you out there selling anything like, health and beauty, right? When you do describe your product, when you have that translated, us at InterCultural Elements, the translators, they make sure to not reflect that it's a medicine if it's not a medicine. It's a very easy thing to fall into if you just give it to sort of translator who doesn't know anything about Amazon or about French Amazon specifically. They'll translate it and it'll seem like a medicine, and Amazon will not let it go online. So yeah, depending on the product, certain countries work better than others. I think it's a rare case when we say people shouldn't expand abroad, because there's usually opportunities out there for pretty much everybody.
So what's Tartanista?
Right, Tartanista. Yeah, so also some really great guys based out of the UK.
Their taglines is like heritage, hedonism, and happiness.
Exactly.
What is it?
Yeah, but really, really great guys. That gives you a little bit of a feeling of the owners there. But absolutely, great business to work with. We've had them as a customer for years and years, and funny story about these guys. They sell all types of products, but one of their core lines is all types of kilts and all the accessories for kilts. Okay, and
where are they based out of?
So they're based out of the UK, but they have I think some strong ties to Scotland.
Yes. Yeah.
So, but the funny thing there is that when you expand something as unassuming as a kilt, right, to a country like Spain, right, most people think, well, you just translate it and you're good to go, right?
Are people buying
Really.
kilts in Spain?
And this is the whole thing, right?
Yeah.
So when we expanded into Spain, we found out that we actually were catering to three different types of people. Number one, Spaniards who had been to Scotland and they knew exactly what these things were called. So we had to put those search terms in English, even in the Spanish listings.
Right.
But then secondarily, Spaniards who they wanted to buy kilts, but they didn't really know what to look for, so they just put in the Spanish terms. And then, funny enough, if you do your research, we also found out that there's a rugby team in Spain that wears kilts. So then you throw in a bunch of those search terms, and you can get a lot more hits. So yeah, but Tartanista, great products there.
Interesting. So talk about expanding the team, because you guys have over 50 people. How do you and probably in different countries, how do you maintain the culture of intercultural elements?
Right. Well, it's easier to do than you would think because we are actually all located in Germany.
You are? Okay.
And yeah. And that has that sort of part and parcel to do with the city that we're in, a city called Leipzig. I've lived here for a number of years and absolutely love it. One of my favorite German cities, and has a big university with a lot of international students. So a lot of people come study here and they don't necessarily want to leave. So yeah, decent sized city, over 500,000 people. So great place to visit.
How do you split the roles between you, Anya, and Edward?
Right. So the three of us basically, I'm responsible mostly for sales and marketing. Anya takes care of a lot of the human resource and just sort of general German administration. That takes a position in itself. And then we also have Edward, who's doing a lot of the tech stuff and more, organizational stuff.
So there's obviously, well, maybe not. What are the advantages and disadvantages of working with your wife? I was going to say there's obviously advantages, but
Right. Exactly. I'll start with the disadvantages and move to the advantages,
okay.
right? So
we'll make sure that she sees this. So you don't,
Exactly. It's no secret, right? So in any case, I think the disadvantage is that you talk way too much about work when you're outside of work. Right. And so both of us have a bit of a safety button where we'll say, OK, look, I think I just need some time off from work right now. And we both respect that. That's really vital in a relationship, I think. But it's a complete pro because, she's really, just to be honest, and I'm not just saying this, she's really the smartest woman I know. And to that extent, to have her ability and also her abilities to learn things and she has a master in psychology, right? So she was a psychologist before this, but to see how she's switched over her abilities and skills to turn that into a great HR manager has been really inspiring to see. Yeah. So yeah, in any case.
What have been some big challenges that you had to overcome?
Yeah, big challenges. I think one of the biggest challenges is really just trying to keep up with the markets. This e-commerce is such a dynamic time. It's the same thing that makes it really exciting can make it challenging, right? So there's so many companies coming and going and new marketplaces. I think the biggest thing for us has really been able to try to keep up with the needs of our clients. And luckily, I hope that we've been able to do that in developing all these different services. But yeah, absolutely. A great example is when Amazon, when was it? February of 2016, I believe, all of a sudden comes out with this demand that, to be able to cater to, or 2015 rather, I think. But, if you want to sell in a foreign country, then you need to have a returns warehouse in that country. That flattened a lot of sellers really quickly where, they said, well, gosh, what's going to happen if I don't have this, right? To that extent, we were able to turn around quite quickly, form a partnership with a quite
That's when your phone starts ringing off the hook. You're like, what Amazon change? You're getting like 30 calls a day. Exactly.
Well, it's funny, now that you mentioned that, Amazon sent out a mass email to sellers back a couple of weeks ago, and you're absolutely right. We're just like, what happened here, So, but yeah, so to be able to really, keep, your ear to the ground and cater to that, that's one of the biggest challenges, but also what makes it so exciting.
Yeah. So, Scott, you probably have your finger on the pulse of these things. What are some of the trends you're seeing with marketplaces in UK and Germany? What would you tell someone? Yeah, like, don't worry about that. That's maybe not exploding, and this one is on the up and coming.
Right. Well, it'll come as no surprise that Amazon is really continuing their domination, right? And whereas, it was funny when you were mentioning eBay and Amazon way back when I was working for ChannelAdvisor and AuktionMaster. I mean, eBay was the big thing, right? And everybody was trying to get their auctions up there. And as time goes on, I think a great starter marketplace for most listeners would probably be Amazon. But don't stop there. I think a trend that we see is, there is such a fragmentation in so many of these countries, like France, I mentioned, Germany as well. And then as these other countries develop, Italy, Spain, etc., that fragmentation offers a lot of opportunity for you. If you know which marketplaces cater to your clientele, you should definitely get on there as well.
What are some of the marketplaces to watch in like UK and Germany? I know it may depend on category, like clothing or whatever the case is, but what are some, like you said, eBay was big and then Amazon just started dominating. What do you think? Maybe they won't take over Amazon, but what's some of the next big things, marketplaces to watch out for?
Right. A couple of nice ones. Ones like Zalando, that's really sort of right up the road from us. Berlin is not too far away. Otto in Germany can be really good, but as you said, very much just depends on the category. UK also has some really interesting ones, like it doesn't necessarily count as a marketplace, but Flubit. Flubit is a really cool one, and an interesting concept that you can look at. There's a lot of opportunity out there, but even going beyond sort of the confines of Europe, Japan, right, Mexico, South America in general with Mercado Libre offers a huge potential, especially if you utilize things like Amazon FBA in the U.S. to send to Mexico. Really good idea there. And I've mentioned Japan a couple of times, but whether you can get on Rakuten if you can sort of fulfill the requirements to do that, or Amazon Japan, right, which is a little bit more familiar. Great opportunities for you.
What do you find the hardest to translate or to get on out of the marketplaces?
Right. Let's say one of the marketplaces which is probably the most challenging is La Redoute in France. The history of it was sort of similar to how we had Sears in the U.S., and that was like the dominant catalog marketplace for really decades. La Redoute had this incredible history, and they were a little bit late getting into the online game, but when they did, they decided we can't really compete with the likes of Amazon or sort of these up and coming ones like Cdiscount, which have lower prices. So we're going to sort of stick with what we do best, and we're going to go for the high end. So I believe through our partnership with La Redoute, we've heard that they generally accept about 3% of the sellers who actually ask to sell on their marketplace.
Really, only 3%?
Yeah, 3%. Yeah, so.
It's like the Harvard of marketplaces or something?
It's incredible. It's incredible, right? So
why do they do that?
Well, number one, they sell their own brand. So to that extent, I think they don't want the competition on there. But also, I think they do want to keep it almost a bit elitist. Like when you look at the, that clientele to buy that in France, especially with French fashion and all this, they do want to be that upper level.
They want to keep it
and they retain
top
that.
tier.
Yeah, absolutely.
Interesting. Yeah. So from the challenges, what have been some of the milestones that you're proud of?
The milestones, I think that links right in with the challenges. It's been great to be able to deliver some of the things that the people have needed. For example, that quick turnaround time on global returns, right? To be able to offer those local return warehouses. Yeah. Also different languages that people have requested as well. At this point we have around about 55 people in-house, and of that 16 different nationalities, right? So even though that sounds like a lot, we're still nimble enough to be able to add on languages relatively quickly as we see them needed. One of the latest ones that we've popped on is Sweden and Swedish, right? For Fyndig is a marketplace that's been established there for a while, but more and more, especially Europeans, want to go into the Nordics, and that's a great way to get in there. So I think a milestone for us has been able to add those languages as quickly as we have.
What have you found, Scott, in the German market or German Amazon that is very popular, that to you it's obvious, but if someone from the U.S. looked at the categories and the products, they would have no idea, like this is one of the most popular products in Germany?
That's a good question. I don't know if there's a specific product that I would say, because I think a lot of the same things sell pretty well.
Yeah.
to maybe switch the question a little bit,
Go ahead.
one thing which a lot of people find quite useful is, especially if you're selling from the States, is if you develop or and or manufacture something in the States, right? It can be great to actually sell that in Germany and really market it as such, right? We're
Really?
very big
Made
on
in the USA.
Absolutely, right? Because any types of sort of sporting equipment, or any types of products that Americans really have a name for. You want to advertise that in foreign countries because it does get some airplay. This, we're big proponents of, if it's made in Germany, definitely saying that. If you can slap a Union Jack on it, that generally gets more sales in foreign countries. So to that extent, anything produced in the USA, definitely advertise that.
What's the perception of the U.S. in Germany in the e-commerce world? Like you just said, made in USA, that has a certain status. I would actually think, if it German on it, that would have more status than made in the USA. What's the perception of the U.S. from? I mean, you've lived there since 2000, for 17 years at this point.
Yeah.
Are there certain commonly held beliefs that would surprise me or people in the U.S.?
Right. Yeah. I think, but perhaps, yeah. I mean, anything to do with healthcare, with sporting equipment, things like that, tends to be pretty well respected. I would say
In the U.S.
Well, let's say if Germans see that it's coming from the U.S., that's sort of developed there,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a general respect for it. I think technology and things like that, they very often like that, coming from Germany, but
Right.
But yeah,
like manufacturing, like Germany, like what would they consider is, I guess, higher perceived value in U.S. and then what's considered higher perceived value in Germany? So the sports and then the healthcare is more maybe higher perceived in the U.S. What would be higher perceived is in German compared to U.S.?
Gotcha, right. I mean, I think any sort of technology or things like that. I mean, everything, you have this sort of stereotypes of cars and things like that.
Right, yeah.
But yeah, that type of thing, I think they like to buy German. You'll see a lot of BMWs and Mercedes driving around. So I think there's a general understanding that they feel like they're sort of superior with that type of thing.
Yeah.
But
They probably are.
lot of other,
Yeah.
and it could be, but we always like to think of these things as everything's just sort of different, right? And you can sell, and it's sort of funny because even my German friends here, sometimes I'll go on about the craft beers in the U.S. and the stereotype there is everybody's just like, everybody's just like, what, American beer is terrible, and I was just like, no, maybe 20 years ago, but if you look at this whole industry which is sprung up, and now every other town has its own craft brewery.
Right.
It's incredible stuff, right? So I think we have to see it as that, and you have to be able to, if you have a good story behind your product, then you can make it so it's attractive. I think that's one of the most important things.
Mm-hmm.
We shouldn't sort of hide behind or get stifled by stereotypes. Instead, tell your story.
So Scott, what level seller would be a good fit for InterCultural Elements? I assume not everyone is. Who's a good fit to actually use you?
Right. We have everybody from relatively small sellers all the way up to sort of smaller enterprise level. Mm-hmm. So we can cater to everybody. And I think we can do that because we have an account manager who is your main contact. But that account manager, let's say that she's French in one case, right? As soon as you're expanding to to Spain, then she'll turn around and get the Spanish account manager to then help her to get you onto those marketplaces, right? So to that extent, I would say that the only size limitation is you have to be able to ship more product and really keep up with the sales. I think that's the biggest thing. So a lot of our most successful sellers have been people who have started off, really selling pretty well, maybe like, let's say 10,000 a month, something like that. But yeah, I mean, you don't have to be real big to start expanding, you know?
So I want you to talk a little bit about some of the, you probably see a lot of people using various softwares and things like that. What softwares and products do you recommend to some of your sellers that they use? Right.
Gotcha. So I think the main software that we're a day-to-day sort of touch point with is our listing tools. So, you have the standard ones out there that I'm sure everybody's aware of. But, I think some that do a really good job, everything from sort of like Volo, Linworks, ChannelAdvisor are some of the ones that we deal with the most. But, there's tons of them out there. I think the key is really just making sure that given your expansion goals, right? Don't get into a listing tool or any other software for that matter that can't cater to where you want to go. Because that's one limitation that we see. People go down the wrong road. They sort of paint themselves into a corner and then can't expand because the software doesn't cater to it.
You mean they get the wrong listing tool for their needs?
Exactly. Very often when people come to us, they say, I want to take over the world, right? I want to go to these like 10 different countries. And we say, great, perfect. What kind of listing tool are you using? And then we find out that it can only go to 2 countries, right? So I think on the seller's part, just make sure that the software is big enough for your dreams. And then hopefully, software-wise, it is nice to see that a lot of these companies are developing sort of in the breadth as well as in the depth of just their home country.
So what are some of the common ones you see? You see ChannelAdvisor, who else? What are some of the other common ones people are using?
Right. I mean, like I said, a couple of ones that we see on a pretty common basis, Volo, since we have a lot of UK sellers, that tends to go pretty well. Linworks is relatively inexpensive and serves a lot of sellers quite well. Again, UK based. And then, there's other ones in Germany too, ones like Plenty Markets, TradeByte, all good software. You just have to take a look at it, make sure that it serves your needs.
Yeah. So besides listing tools, what other software are people using that you'd say look into?
Right, exactly. To be honest, we really we rely a lot more on sort of our internal account managers and things like that. So actually, there's really not a lot of other software that we deal with, besides of course Amazon Seller Central. That's something a lot of sellers use, but not a lot of other ones.
You have something called Amazon Scout.
Correct.
What's that?
Right. So we have a lot of our sellers have the issue that let's say that you're a seller, you sell a bunch of products, let's say 2,000 products. Now, I've mentioned a couple of times you want to find a proper strategy, right, before going abroad.
Yeah.
Instead of just saying, well, I've gotten some sales from the UK, I'll go there, right? Since it takes so much time and effort and resource to go into a new marketplace, you want to make sure that you're going to the best marketplace. So Amazon Scout is a way to do that. What it does is it takes your UPCs or EANs or ASINs if you have them, and it will then search for all of those products on all the Amazons around the world. If it finds your products on other Amazons, it will return data on those. It'll include really important stuff like, okay, who's selling it in country by country? What are the price points, right? And based on that data, you can see a good number of things. Number one, you can see who your competition is, right?
Yeah.
If you're going to be competitive in that market, right? And if you it's sort of hard to describe without sort of showing a chart here, but basically we have charts which show pie charts, and it will show compared to the sellers who are currently selling that product. If you were to sell your products there, you're going to be cheaper on, let's say, 84% of it. So that's a no-brainer that you have to get into that market.
Right.
And of course, by identifying which products are already sold there, you can, if it's the same product, you can piggyback on that listing. So negates the need to translate anything, right? You're there in an instant, and very often you're cheaper.
Yeah.
So that's Amazon Scout in a nutshell.
So Scott, I really appreciate your time on this. This is very interesting. I'm sure people make a ton of mistakes when going to all these foreign countries. I have one last question, but I want people to check out the website. Where should we point people towards? I have intercultural-elements.eu.
Correct.
Are there any other websites that we should point people towards or places online, or is that the best place?
I think intercultural-elements.eu for European Union, that's the one to go to. That's our home site.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So before I ask the last question, what have we not talked about that you think would be important with selling internationally or intercultural elements?
Right. One thing we haven't talked all that much about is customer service, and that is that's another thing where we see people trip up on, especially when you're doing it yourselves. So I would give the tip that, all the things we've talked about, you can get it translated correctly, localized, you can get it, put it up there. And, let's say that you're doing really well. It's all going to fall flat if you don't have that customer service backing you up. There are certain countries where you absolutely do not want to, or say it a different way, you want to have native speakers answering your emails.
Yeah.
Okay. Japan is probably the best example.
How would people do it on their own in Japan? They just throw in Google Translate and then upload it? Really?
Yep.
That's how they do it?
Exactly. And one thing I would just mention, if I can, there's a great blog series, this certain blog article that we have called Up and Coming Marketplaces. I think we published it last year, and it was talking about Mexico and Japan.
Where can I find it?
So right on our website, so intercultural-elements.eu, and then there's basically a resources section and then a blog. And under that, we tell a story of how right. So basically, one of our Japanese customer service representatives talked about how very often it has to do with the details, something that we as Westerners wouldn't necessarily pay attention to. Examples would be things like, we actually got complaints from Japanese buyers who received a shirt, and shirt itself was absolutely fine. The problem was that the tag, the thing that you normally just rip off and throw away, that was bent slightly. And that warranted a complaint. Second one was somebody expected something to be...
How do you avoid that?
Exactly, and that's the whole thing, right? But that's so to a large extent, it's very difficult to avoid those types of things. But he basically says just be really careful of the details. Something that is probably avoidable, maybe a better example, is something was advertised to arrive in a box. Again, you throw the box away; it doesn't really matter. But it arrived in a bag. And that warranted a complaint, even though the product itself was fine. But perhaps the key there, even more than how you treat your products, is the customer service aspect. Most Westerners don't know there's actually multiple politeness forms in Japanese. And Google Translate simply cannot cater to that. It can't understand it. But if you use the wrong one, then you're pretty much guaranteeing yourself somebody's going to be offended, and you're going to get a negative. So, so customer service, super important. Get native speakers. It's something that InterCultural Elements offers, but there's other companies out there as well that offer it. But get natives to take care of that for you as you expand.
So, Scott, my last question is, I'm curious what conferences you like, and then. You're going to the Prosper Show. How can people get the most out of the Prosper Show when they go?
Right. To be honest, it's hard not to. So Prosper Show was it's really so. First time that it was sponsored or that it was put on was last year, and we sponsored it straight away because we thought it really catered to the clientele that we were looking to contact, and incredible. So I gave a speech there last year. Just really great. I think turnout. But
what did you talk about?
So I talked about expansion into a lot of marketplaces that the people may not necessarily expect to go to. So we sort of stayed away from the Amazons by and large, but we talked about everything from some of the emerging ones in like Southeast Asia to South America, to other ones that you may not expect even in Europe. So chat about that. But Prosper Show is a great show to go to. That's coming up in just a month or two. I definitely recommend that. That's one of my favorite ones. I mean, some other ones where I find that you find some really good content. ChannelAdvisor's Catalyst, right? They have one on both sides of the pond, right? That's really great. And then a lot of the ones that are out there, IRCE in Chicago. So we're heading to that for the first time this year, but heard that that's really full with great content. And then some European ones actually that are up and coming as well.
Nice.
So in any case.
Scott, I appreciate your time. This has been great. Everyone should check out intercultural-elements.eu, and if they want to sell internationally, they need to check it out.
Great. Hey, thanks so much for your time, Jeremy.
Thanks, Scott.
What I got, you can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better.